is going on, guys? Welcome back into the Fantasy F1 cockpit. This is your captain speaking, and we are just several hours away from the Chinese Grand Prix weekend from getting underway. As before, remember to go to the Fantasy Sports Advice Network for all your fantasy sports needs, as well as download it on your phone's respective app store, and we'll get right into it. So in just several hours, we're getting into practice and sprint qualifying. Something new for this year, sprint qualifying doesn't give us any points. So for those thinking you have to lock your teams in tonight, that is not true. You do not. They lock tomorrow night right before the sprint race, as only regular qualifying and the sprint race, as well as the race, will be giving us points. So don't sweat that. We'll get into some chip strategy today. We'll talk about China itself. We'll talk about some basic drivers changes for those that don't want to be burning their chips this early in the season. And we'll run through some quick driver combinations. So without further ado, in here you can see I have the track times for all this thing. It's in a weird layout right off the Formula One site, going from practice and sprint qualifying later tonight, the sprint and qualifying tomorrow before the race. I have it in Eastern time as I'm in Canada, and the track time out in Shanghai right now. So moving into China, here we got a graphic here of the track. It's a very unique track, but it is a nice mix of low, medium, and high-speed corners, and it has two very long straights in back-to-back with DRS zones right before starting into the turns to those long straights as well. Kind of similar to Australia, where we have those back-to-back DRS zones to be able to catch back up and like kind of hinder the train, but there is two detection zones rather than just one, like we had, I believe, in Australia. Below here, I have the graphic. For those that really want to get into it, there's a lot of information here. So they're using the middle three compounds for the race weekend this weekend. The front left tire is usually the one that takes the biggest hit on a track like this, and they're expecting degradation to be pretty high. I believe they've resurfaced this track. And I know it was kind of aggressive a bit on tires last year. I believe this is a 1 to 2 stop race, depending how degradation goes, as well as if we have safety cars. I believe last year a big reason why there was 2 or more pit stops was due to a safety car, as I believe last year was the first time in 3 races that they had cars DNF here at China. So all this information is down here. Feel free to pause this and make do of this information as you want. All that matters for me is they're using the middle 3 compounds, and they expect degradation to be kind of high. So I do think McLaren has a great advantage here. Something they did really well last year was manage their tires well. We saw them in Australia build massive gaps, and as well as getting those hard tires really warmed up really quickly, despite Verstappen chasing them down with mediums. So they seem to manage tire temperature really well. How they're doing that remains a mystery to other teams, but for now, until they get caught up, McLaren should fare very well this weekend. So some facts about China as well. This is a fairly safe track for as many rookies as we saw. I'd be very surprised to have as many DNFs as we had in Australia last week. One, because it's supposed to be a dry weekend, and China is historically a fairly safe track. There's not many DNFs or red flags or even yellow flags for that matter. Just for a timing type of stat that I found very interesting, the difference between the longest and shortest race ever had here at China is just 28 minutes. 28 minutes. We've had red flags last longer than that. So that to me strikes at how safe and how uncommon it is, as there's not being a street circuit, there's less things likely to hit. The runoff areas seem to be a little bit safer. Only 8 of the 17 races here at China have even had a safety car, and they've never had more than 2. So even though we have as many rookies as we do, this is a fairly safe track. It is also an exciting track. What makes it an exciting track is because I believe this has the record for most overtakes in a single race. Back in 2016, I believe had 170 overtakes. I believe that is where Daniel Kvyat became the famous human torpedo into turn 1. And it caused a lot of main competing cars to start at the back, so a lot of overtakes there. But still, 170 kind of skews the results a bit. But since 2009, they have averaged 74.5 overtakes per race. Granted, one of those is 170, so I don't know what that number is going to look like once we take it out, but an average is 30. So an average for any race for all the circuits is 30. The fact that it's more than double that, even with one outlier race, I imagine there's going to be some pretty racy moments. A lot of times the drivers that have started from pole have won it 10 of 17 times, and only one driver, I believe it was Lewis Hamilton, has won a triple crown at this event, being starting at pole, leading all the laps of the race, and having the fastest lap, all while leading to a win. So China, fairly safe, but still leads for some excitement with overtakes. I really do think what we see even in sprint qualifying could be pretty common for what we're going to see into regular qualifying. Yes, we'll get into talking about some of these chips this weekend, as a lot of people were devastated with their teams in Australia. Even my own team, as much as I had a nice mix of people that went up and down, I'm very fortunate to have remained pretty close in value, but a lot of people lost significant value. I see a lot of people in and around the 1.5, 2 million budget loss range, as well as either starting in negative points, whether they're starting with sub 100 points. So I know the consensus seems to be that there's two chips primarily to use this weekend. I know there's people that are going to be wanting to maybe use a 3-time score because it's really exciting. It's a sprint weekend. There's more points to be had. I prefer to wait on the 3-time score because I want to be absolutely sure who is looking absolutely dominant, and I want to be able to know that I have the rest of my team also getting me lots and lots and lots of points. So that's usually one I like to save for later sprint races when I have a clear picture of how everyone's going to do. The no negative is kind of a waste. It really was more key for last weekend. That's kind of how I worked with my main team, was I used the no wildcard knowing it was going to be wet with that many rookies, and we're forced to take some. And even now we're going to still be forced to take some, but I know it may seem like, oh, if they're going to do poorly again, why don't I use it? More of this week, it's going to be managing the budget, just because we have an idea of how the algorithm is working now. So I think the no negative is going to be used for a future wet race. The autopilot, again, save it for a wet race once you've built some budget on your team and you kind of have a more bigger pair of players. Unless you, by some miracle of really dumped your constructors and you're running both McLarens, you want to use that this weekend, by all means, do that. But in final fix, I don't think for this weekend early on. It's more the Limitless and the Wildcard are the two chips we want to be using here. So first, looking at this Limitless chip. So the people who want to be using this are anyone who gained value in Australia. And as hard as it is to believe, there are teams out there. There are a lot of people that doubled up on Mercedes and Ferrari. They ran, because of that, they had to run someone like Kimi Antonelli, so they kind of lucked themselves into that situation. And then Hulkenberg surprised for us, Ocon surprised for us, Stroll even surprised us. So there are people that have multiple of these guys that had a good Australia. So there are teams out there that will have the ability to use this chip. When we go into team construction, I'll show you more of that as far as points per million, as to who are the people that fall into this teams who gain value in Australia. The other one is weekly leagues. May not be as popular now, but for anyone that has leagues with friends or even coworkers that maybe do weekly payouts for people that maybe for best score during the week. Knowing it's this early, a lot of people are panicking. Maybe more people are having to use wild cards. This may be an easy time to use that Limitless chip and almost guarantee a win, get a small payout that way. And then the last one is nobody, if this grid rainbows. And what I mean by that is much like a poker game, when the board rainbows means you have something of every different suit. So if we go into practice and ultimately sprint qualifying tonight, and we have a different constructor, one after the other. So it goes like McLaren, Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, Mercedes, McLaren, Red Bull. This is not the weekend to be running that Limitless chip. The Limitless chip really is best when you have a guaranteed idea of the top 2 constructors and a top 5 drivers. So realistically, you want 2 teams to dominate, and then what's likely going to be Max Verstappen, short of him having an issue in qualifying where his car explodes or he has a rare crash, things of that nature. So realistically, this early on, if you are using the Limitless chip, you're looking at the McLaren's likely to clean up in qualifying. So there's one of your constructors and two drivers. And then we're looking to see what happens with Mercedes, Ferrari, and even Red Bull, or a Williams driver. Who knows? It's so hard to guess right now because we really didn't have a good measuring stick in Australia because of how chaotic the race was. I'm really wanting to leave the Limitless alone for this week just because I don't think we've had a good enough race to gauge how all these teams are. We're going to have much more sprint races throughout the calendar. There's still 5 more to go after this week, so lots of time to use it, lots of time to use it 3 times. But like short of the grid having a very solid, like both McLarens, both Mercedes, Max Verstappen, and that's how it looks for sprint qualifying, then I'd feel a little bit better going with those exact 5 on the Limitless one. Short of that, you might only be losing a few points here or there, but I would much rather be confident when I'm using my heavy hitting chips, which are the Limitless and the 3 times, as you are getting a boatload of points. And that just, to me, seems what the strategy should be. I know I'm not going to be using the Limitless in any of my teams this week. If anything, I think there's a couple teams, especially my budget building ones, that will use the wild card.
And for the wild card, there's going to be a lot of people having to burn this weekend, mainly because their teams lost so much value. And the way that we know the algorithm works, I'll just pull that across here. This, of course, is provided by the F1 Fantasy Tools Discord. So we know they basically have 4 terms of measuring how somebody does, and it's all based on their points per $1 million cost. So basically, they need just over 0.4 to get a great rating, 0.3 to 0.4 for a good rating, and then anything sub 0.3 is deemed poor or terrible, so they're going to be losing value. And so they have 2 different tiers of drivers. For any driver over 20 million is an A tier change, so their changes are going to be either by 0.1 or 0.3, so they're going to be a lot harder to move, slower moving, whereas the B tiers, especially like people like Antonelli, who's right up under that A tier, have the ability to make these big jumps of 0.6 million in price change. And that goes the same with all these rookies. So for a lot of these drivers that people saw, like for example, just looking at teammates even, between Sainz and Albon, Alonso and Stroll, for those ones that took likely one of those, if not the other, one of those drivers, no matter what happens this weekend, is going to see a decrease in price. Because of the DNFs and the negative points all being averaged over a 3-race weekend, even if they were any of those drivers that didn't finish this week were to even outright win the race this week, that's still going to give them like 0 points per million, which is still less than 0.3. So either way, there's going to be quite a few drivers that we'll get into in a sec that are going to be going down in price regardless of how they do this week. So for those that lost budget, you're going to be losing even more. And so that's where this wild card is going to be for those teams. So I have a budget building team that falls in this category. I believe I scored only like maybe 50, 40 points this week with it. I tripled up on Williams, which sort of came back to bite me. But we'll get into that. And then the other one is going to be for maybe people who didn't really lose out, but are going to be really aggressive budget builders. Because right now, with the way that the 3-race average works out, we have a good idea of who's going to be going up regardless of what happens this weekend and who's going down regardless of what happens this weekend. So for really aggressive budget builders, which even I'm considering for some of the teams I did, to use a wild card to completely revamp my team for the people that we know are going to be going up more money again this week, just to keep building the budget, as this is probably the most clear direction we're going to have at any point in the season for where almost half of these drivers are going to go. So those are really the only people that need to be using these chips this weekend. They're the only 2 I think that should be in play for this weekend. So once again, just to quickly show people. So this is the algorithm. So the first step is deeming how good of a weekend they had. And then this is the changes below in step 2 that based on how their weekend was rated, how their price is going to change. And part of me really believes that the points of 0.3, even 0.4 per million seems kind of low almost. Like I feel like there could be a lot of weeks where a lot of these drivers are moving up. As here I have a list of all these drivers where you can see the price per million values here. And so you can really get a good idea of like how different like some of these teams worked out, because I know a lot of big decisions that people are really wanting to make, myself included, is I'm able to run the McLaren Constructor with Piastri, but Piastri being all the way down here, the top 10, whereas if we had Lando instead of Piastri as our 2 times, and he was the one that did what Piastri did, as I know myself included all had Piastri doubled, you kind of lose a lot more. So it is kind of safer to have McLaren in there. Haas was really surprising, but also at the same time not, when 6 drivers all crash out, and both your drivers and your constructor cost peanuts. It really doesn't take much for them to start getting positive points per million, especially when there's going to be 6 points apiece, 12 points for the team, just because of positions gained from people crashing out. Now, ultimately, that's not going to happen this weekend in China. I really don't expect there to be many DNFs. We'll get into builds later, but Haas is a team that kind of feels trappy to me. It feels a bit like a trap. I'm not too excited to have too many of them on my team, but for a lot of people, especially using these wild cards, if you are burning your wild card this week, you have to choose people that are moving up in value. You can't risk taking the Sainzes, the Alonsos, just because they got cheaper. You can make an even bigger team. If you're making the same mistakes, what's the point in burning the wild card? You have to pick positive moving drivers, which we'll get into in a bit. But to me, that's really how you have to look at these point per million charts and these wild card chips. We are not using anything, no transfers, no chips until after practice 1 and sprint qualifying. So you're not using any chips, no free transfers until after we see what happens. We want to make the best use of them. I know a wild card gives you unlimited chips, but if everything goes to plan and the drivers that were supposed to be going to positive all crash out, then you've just wasted that wild card, and it doesn't matter how many changes you make. We want to be effective. It's very important that use them efficiently. Wait till the last minute to use them. You want to have as much information as you can. That's how we be successful at F1 Fantasy. So, for people now that don't want to use chips, there are a lot of teammates that cost pretty similarly. And so these are some pretty well-owned drivers as well. Sainz on 57% of teams, Alonso on 43% of teams, Bortoleto on 24% of teams. Compared to Sainz at 57, Albon was only owned 20. Stroll was only owned 9% to Alonso's 43. So these are drivers on the same teams driving similar equipment, likely to finish in similar places, that are pretty close in price. So regardless of what happened to your team, the 3 drivers on the left are likely going to see more negative points this week. As sad as it is, even no matter how good these guys are, we're always rooting for them, they're going to go down this week, and that's just the reality of it. Whereas their teammates on the right here with Albon, Hülkenberg, and Stroll, which I don't think people are going to be able to flip from the Saubers. I think most people have both of them. But if you are able to, by all means do it, because these 3 are going to go up in price. And so knowing that they're so close in price already, you don't want to be losing more budget on your team. You want to be gaining value on your team. So even if it's for 1 week, try to make as many of these changes if you're not using a chip. Even if you're using a chip, these 3 should be on the left, should be coming out. These 3 should be going in if you're able. As well as the Haas teams aren't bad options to be going into lineups this week because they aren't taking dreadful negatives for the next few weeks. You just want to be looking toward the future that if they're not getting much points this week, maybe they don't go down by much or at all, but just knowing in the future, we just don't see them trending upwards a whole lot to the point where they're probably just going to stall out at wherever their points per million is basically just going to be alternating, going up and down each week. And those aren't really the players we want on our teams. So this is three that if you're not using chips, you can do. If you're able to make all three of these moves to the point where your whole team is scoring positive, I would totally take the -10 to accomplish these three switches rather than using the wild card. The second you're taking more than 10 points negative, you'd probably want to be using that wild card. It's just so well worth it because a 20-point negative, you're basically eliminating one of your top drivers, and that's just a devastating hit more than I think people think of. But we definitely want, this is a week for saving the budget. And so that's things that we want to try to work towards. So moving on into some teams that, just for examples, that we can be building. So these are the teams I built for you guys. So I had a couple built with a constructor focus, some with a driver focus, and some with the budget builder. Just looking at how they did again. So my driver focus won, my constructor focus won at 100 points, 125 for the driver, and 47 for my budget building team. So quite devastating. Let's go to the budget builder one first. Just looking at how this team can be built. So right now, the Triple Williams definitely hurt. Hajjar crashing out definitely hurt. Piastri unfortunately losing positions hurt, although it shouldn't be too hard for him to get back positive again. So this might be, knowing that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like Red Bull being now positive doesn't need too much to get into the positive again, only -1 million. Same with Williams. Albon kind of saved everything that Sainz is doing for this team, so they kind of could balance out. I might really be able to salvage this team with something as simple as eliminating these two drivers and then working back to the bottom for going by value, seeing who's actually a positive. We might be looking at an Esteban Ocon, and then I still have 11 million here. Maybe that's getting me a, goodness, we're in that weird place right now. Maybe I run my Lance Stroll for now, and yeah, I got 3 million to burn. It's tough, 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 tough. It's a weird place. It's a weird place to be in. Even maybe now this is where I do take a third, and now we look at, let's see, Ferrari had a positive week, Mercedes had a positive week, so rather than going Red Bull, maybe go Mercedes. So now I'm going to be taking a -10 on this team, but it might be well worth it for a budget building team where Mercedes seems to be trending upwards. I don't think it's going to take much for Williams to trend upwards. But if I'm looking to just make maybe only 3 moves and take a -10, this is kind of where we're having to look with the team I had. Now, if we were wanting to start completely anew, like burn the wild card, I think for a budget building team, it's hard to argue with Mercedes right now, given I know a lot of stuff worked the right way for them, but they were consistent. And even Antonelli maybe was unfortunate in qualifying, worked his way up the field better than anyone else did, even if he gained maybe 4 of those spots through a safety car. It's hard to argue with results there. So even going Mercedes, and then let's say, I don't really want to do Haas. I don't really trust them this week. Let's see what a Ferrari looks like. If we were to go Mercedes, Ferrari, we still have 49 million. So moving over to the drivers. Let's look at all the positives here at the bottom first. So Nico Hulkenberg is a plus. Ocon is a plus. Lance Stroll is a plus. How are we doing? We're at 25 million right now. It's looking pretty tough. So, you know what? Kimi Antonelli should be going up again at 0.6 and at 19 million. Leaves us with 6.8 to go. Looking at these, they're all -0.6, -0.6. I think the best thing for us to do here is actually maybe to go with Behrman, only because he technically took positive points last week. So the positive points weren't enough on his price per million to go up, but the fact that he, unlike all these others down here, are starting with like minus 20, minus 18, minus 20, he's only at 2. Having an 18-point lead is so much less to make up than all these other guys. If he can be close to points, he's not gonna take as big of a drop again, maybe. So maybe all these guys take another 0.6 again this week. Maybe he only takes a 0.2. Maybe even I don't see a scenario where he goes up 0.2. I really don't think that. But as far as mitigating, knowing that the rest of these drivers are all moving up, this is gonna bug me. Sorry, Antonelli has to go here. That's just bugging me. Little, I don't know why it's that way. It is the way it is. There we go. Looks a little bit nicer. So not a bad team. Everyone on this team is almost trending completely upwards. I expect this to, the Behrman one to maybe like not be as bad again. But who knows? That still leaves me at 0.7 with budget. Moving forward, we could always be switching out maybe like a Ferrari and an Antonelli for maybe getting back towards that Piastri and Williams build once they start trending upwards, maybe after this week. So maybe that's a move I make next week, and then I'm slowly working back from maybe dumping Ocon to a lower price asset, and then maybe jumping back into a Signs, knowing that he's going to be dropping again this week too. So these are things that as you make the changes, I want to look at how many of these pieces I'll probably want to move off of in future weeks as well. Like I'm not desperate to get off of Ferrari, but I'd be more desperate to get off of the Haas's in the future. Whether maybe I use a wild card this week and I take minus 10 next week to bounce back off. I'm knowing we're in that third race, so the averages might get a little bit more even, but we may have to be running these budget saving kind of teams first. So that's one idea. I know for a lot of constructor focused ones, honestly, could be going after the McLaren and then either the Aston Martin, the Haas teams, just because Haas actually had their best pit stop of the last 2 years this past weekend. So looking at maybe the constructor focused one, once again, most of this team, like the Williams, I expect at only 0.2 will salvage itself. I have 3 pieces to fix. Piastri, thankfully, is only a -3, so I think, finishing second completely rights the ship for him there. But as I was saying, so unfortunately, I'm running both of these. I was fortunate to already be running Stroll. So, like I was saying earlier on, we throw Albon in that spot. Now we only have 0.2 to use here. And then Bortoletto at 5.4. I don't think I can replace him out with anyone. It'd be Isaac Hadjar or himself, but he's actually less 2 points. So for this one, that might be as much without burning a wild card as I can do. Maybe I flip the Williams out for something. I'd rather not, just because I do think the Williams will score more points and it'll be eventually worth more than any value I'll get from any of these other teams. As much as Haas is going up, likely will go up again. I really think it's going to be the last week of this for them. I really think with most cars on the grid, they're not going to look nearly as nice. So maybe I'll leave Williams in there. A lot of it's going to depend on how practice looks to see how desperate I am to use that wild card and make some moves. Even if I wanted to upgrade some more to take Piastri out, knowing we already switched Albon, throw Antonelli in there. I have an extra 4 to spend. Maybe this is how I move Bortoletto out. Going back to value again. Yeah, and then maybe I take Esteban Ocon here. And then moving forward, as far as teams, knowing Sainz is going to get cheaper, maybe in a few weeks I move Albon back to Sainz, knowing that he's getting the DNF off his score. It's going to be trending back upwards, and I can move off of Ocon onto literally anyone else, as I really don't trust the Haas's too much this week. But the big thing is all these negative drivers that we're seeing that we're basically forced into due to budget constraints. They're really, really hurting us. And just the way the algorithm's going to work is going to continue to hurt us. So that's some things that you could do. The wild card is looking very good for that, but I believe here I made only 3 changes. Luckily on this team, some people are going to have a lot more. So that may be something I'm happy to take -10 on to be able to use a wild card down the road should someone make huge advancements, kind of like McLaren did last year, where they just kind of all of a sudden found pace and righted the ship. Maybe that's Ferrari this year, since there is, I think, big parity in between the driver pairings. There's some driver pairings that are absolutely dominant, filled with veterans, like you could say McLaren right now, you could say Ferrari right now, and even Williams. And then you have these high-end teams that have maybe something a little more volatile with a rookie in there, like the Mercedes and the Red Bull. And so I definitely think that's something we have to watch as well. So keeping your chips as long as you can, very, very, very helpful. And now looking at this team again, the racing, this was just it looks worse now than it was having both Williams drivers. Luckily, Norris was there to save me. Hulkenberg and Red Bull won't take much to right the ship. I feel a dry weather Lawson should improve a little bit. So looking at this right away, we know that Hadjar is going to be out. I'm going to say, let's say the Racing Bulls are out as well. So going for the cheapest positive value, again, who are we looking at? Maybe that's Esteban Ocon again. And then, that only leaves us with not a whole lot for constructors. Can't even afford the Haas's right now. Don't really want the kick salver, so Ocon's probably not the play, but it also might be dumping Carlos Sainz at this point. So looking at this team, Aston Martin's negative, but they took positive points. Might be similar to a Behrman situation where both drivers look competitive, might be able to right the ship and even go up like a 0.2, which is fine. I really don't know what to do with Haas. Starting at 14 is just such a nice piece. Even the kick salver, as cheap as they are, really don't need much points and a points per million to start trending the right direction. Let's just put Haas in there for now. We'll see how it looks. Leaves us with 10 million as far as drivers that we can fit in there. Yuki Tsunoda at 0 points. 9 million. I think it's going to be something like that, like Lance Stroll. Still gives us 2 million in the bank, but now we're all trending upwards in the right direction. So I believe that's 3 changes with Stroll, Ocon, and Haas. So that's -10 as well. So I'm doing my best here to really show, based on different types of teams, like what can you do to absolutely avoid using the wild card, because the wild card likely could be the way to go here. A lot of it's going to depend on, as long as things go safely through practice and sprint qualifying, it might be very well worth doing just to completely reset, because part of me thinks it would be nice to be able to switch the Red Bull over to a Mercedes. And then maybe even like adjusting the Norris to the Piastri just to get a bit more money somewhere else, seeing as how the lower end drivers are the ones that are possibly going to hurt us the most. This is supposed to be a driver focused one, so should I use a wild card? Just let's have a little fun here. So let's say Williams did get 10 points, so let's put them back in here. Let's take the Haas out, and you know what? I kind of believe more in the Aston Martin than the Haas. I think they'll get points, they'll right the ship. Maybe they both only go up like 0.2 this week, but we'll see what happens. So let's run 2 budget constructors and see what we can do here now. So looking at Lance Stroll, actually, if I take out Ocon, oh baby, look at this. This is gonna be nice. All right, so if we take out, let's add Antonelli in there, and I still have 10 million to spend. Oh, it could have been me. Look at this. Look at this. Do you like this? I like this. This is great. So, I'm hesitant to take Hulkenberg out, even though I have the value, mainly because he started at 20 points. So even with him having somewhat of a bad race, it's going to be hard seeing him going down a significant amount of money. At this rate, is it worth upgrading any of the constructors? I don't think so. Like Alpine starting negative, Haas, I can only like save money really. I'd almost be curious just to let this run. It's not the most ideal, mainly just because, like, I mean, hopefully all three of these guys are scoring points, and anything can happen with these two based on what last week showed us. They really have to carry the team for us because Norris essentially is scoring the same points as a McLaren constructor. So just imagine Norris is actually McLaren down here, and Antonelli is the guy that we're two times. Like, there's so many ways to look at this because they score similarly. Again, we're just brainstorming. We're gonna get back in tomorrow after we watch what happens in practice and qualifying tonight. So if we have, leave some comments down below. We'll try to answer as many as we can. You can message me at FSAN Captain on X, as well as join the community at fantasysportsadvice.network. We have a racing page on there. I'm one of the few content creators on there right now answering questions, so it'll be really easy to find your stuff. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Enjoy practice and qualifying. We'll see you.